ICQ Podcast episode 414. Simple test gear you can build. Hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this episode 414 of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported this episode by our monthly annual subscription donors. In this episode we join Martin M1MRB, Dan KB6 November Uniform, Caryn KD2 Golf Uniform Tango, Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Ed DD5 Lima Papa to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BLY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is simple test gear you can build yourself. Well, this show is a advert-free show where you can show your value for what you get for free and help us, pay our way and, keep the show advert-free and away from any sort of commercial sponsorship, etc. And we do that by a very simple method. We ask you to turn the value you got from the show into a financial figure. Visit our webpage at icqpodcast.com/donate and send us a donation your way of that value. It's our monthly subscription donors this episode that continue to give us a wonderful base to pay our way, that are helping us out and continue to allow us to do the show. So if you find value from today's show, please visit that website link and it'd be great for you to get involved. And now we join Martin, Dan, Caryn, Edmund and Ed to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including news on a SOTA challenge and a 10-year-old net controller. As always, hope you enjoy.
So hi guys, and welcome to this episode of the ICQ Podcast, episode 414, and tonight's news roundtable for that episode. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Hi Dan.
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, good to have you back, Dan. And let's say, 414. We're putting them in, aren't we? But,
Here we are.
Yeah. Also, your side of the pond, we have Caryn Eve Murray KD2GUT. Getting your call sign right this time, Caryn.
Yes, sure did. And hello, Martin. Hello, everyone. It is great to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Caryn, and hopefully I can continue to get your call sign right. Well, at least most of the time. But I sometimes put you as a call sign in the UK, I know. But good one. In the UK, I've got Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0MMG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hey, yeah, and I know you worried that you might not have made it today because of work, but good you're here, mate. And last but not least, we have Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP, over there in Germany. Hi, Ed.
Yeah, hello, Martin, and to the listeners, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you are listening to the podcast.
No guten Tag, then.
Grüß Gott.
You're far better at German than I am. Great, guys. Well, let's hope we give our listeners an interesting set of stories. Now, first one, and it was the only UK story I could find which was of any interest. The RSGB director is going to do a SOTA challenge, and it's 10 activations or 10 summits in 12 days. Now, Ed, I know you're a SOTA mountain goat, so you probably know more about this than most of us, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, as I was saying before we started, 10 summits in 12 days is not a lot, except when you point out where the summits are. These are up in the Hebrides, in the islands north of Scotland, and Ben Lloyd, GW4BML or GM4BML as he will be operating up there because he's in Scotland, is not only travelling between these small islands and climbing the hills and mountains with his radio gear, but he's also got his wife along, who is also licensed, and the 2-year-old daughter, I think. So, and he's in fact in the middle of this challenge at the moment, or coming to the end of it, I guess. So hopefully he, Martha and Lyra will come back home all safe and well. And yeah, it's something that Ben's been involved with publicity for SOTA previously when there's been some PR done. And it is, he says himself, it's one of these things where he enjoys hill walking and climbing, and he enjoys radio. So it's a really good match for him. They go together, and he's also even putting back some short videos onto YouTube in the RSGB channel. So those of us that aren't actually up there, or those of us that aren't actually working him on the HF bands, can at least see what he's been doing. Good luck to him, and hopefully, as I said, all come home safely in probably, I guess he'll be back before the convention, so he must be coming back this week. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, no problems, Ed. And I should imagine he'll be back before the convention. Edmund, interesting doing these challenges, but I don't think I want to do it take a 2-year-old along, climbing and hiking up to very high points. That, to me, would be a bit of an extra worry. But what do you think?
Well, yes, indeed, and he's certainly a braver man than I am. It's nice to see some videos on the RSGB YouTube channel of the great and the good within the RSGB actually doing activations. I don't think, recently anyway, I don't think there are videos of anybody else, and it's a bit of a pity, really, because I know that other RSGB senior people do go on the air. I have heard some of them and worked some of them on occasions. But these videos of Ben, there are 18 at the time of recording. We're recording this on Wednesday, the 4th of October, and most of them are only a couple of minutes long. So you could probably binge watch the whole lot in about an hour. I haven't seen any of them yet, but when I get a spare moment, I will be watching with interest. And many congratulations to Ben for doing this. I hear what Ed said a minute ago, but about that number of summits not being that many in the grand scheme of things. But speaking as somebody who, shall I say, is never going to win Slimmer of the Year, to my ears, Ed, it does sound rather a lot.
Well, in fairness, you could, and let's be honest about it, if you do one a day, great. I know when you do SOTA activations, I think it is four QSOs from a location to get that log made. But in fairness, it's not going to stop you once you get up there working for half a day. And in fairness, lots of people would probably like to get to work you and those sort of things. So I think it's a good one.
Just on that, Martin, you're absolutely right. 4 to qualify a summit, but it's very rare that an activator will only take 4 contacts, except if it's at the top of a mountain and it's like minus 30 degrees and he or she wants to get off it. So, as you say, it can be an afternoon's or an hour or 2 hours radio operation portable. And it depends where you are. As I said in my piece at the beginning, these summits aren't all on one island. They're spread across multiple islands. So, getting there is a lot more of the work than actually the radio operation in this case. So, well done to Ben. And it'd be good, hopefully, to meet him at the convention.
Yeah. Well, I did a few SOTA activations a few years back. And I remember one I did. I went to a trig point on the South Downs in the UK, South Downs overlooking Brighton. And the wind was so strong that day. I put a fishing pole mast up and the thing was almost bent over at 90 degrees in the winds, and you just couldn't do anything. And I remember at that time sitting down with my back to the trig point, the high point's like a concrete block, and I sat my back into the wind with this trig point covering me. And I pulled out a 2-meter handy talkie and worked 4 people. I got the activation, but it was horrible up there. And it wasn't difficult to get to, but it was just the weather was horrible. But there you go. Caryn, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this story. I had the privilege of one email contact with Ben in preparing the story for Newsline, and it was short, of course, because there was not a lot of time and not great internet. Well, to me, this is the essence of adventure radio. those of us who love the outdoors and those of us who love radio find this a perfect storm, so to speak. I must say, a POTA activator, a brand new POTA activator such as myself, I'm really kind of wimping out because most of what I do, you can drive to, park, you unload your equipment, you set up. It's like, oh, okay. This really gave me great respect for what this is like mega SOTA. This isn't just climbing. This is swimming or biking or wading or boating. It's almost a triathlon when you think about it. I think people knowing about this, watching the videos, and maybe even hearing if Ben does any presentations about this later on, will gain some respect for what's involved. And what I'm really hoping is that people will want to do this. I mean, I have no desire to carry my radio equipment through a bog that's waist high, watch me trip and get everything soaked. But I think there's a real challenge to it, and sometimes the challenge is going to be more than just bad propagation. It really tests your character and your spirit. So, as I say, people should really watch the videos and understand what's involved in this, and then maybe if they're curious, give it a try, just on a less physically challenging level for starters. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, no problems, Caryn. And you're right, there are different levels of complexity, and the easier summits to reach are lower in points. You get so many points for different points for different summits, depending on how high they are and various bits and pieces. And I believe the points changes can change summer to winter as well. Yeah, it's certainly worth going out and doing. Now, Dan, I've seen pictures of you doing POTA, but I'm not sure if you've ever done a SOTA.
Well, I haven't, and you know why? Because there's no summits here in Southeast Michigan. I mean, seriously, it's flat as a pancake here. So there's no SOTA in Southeast Michigan. That sounds like a title for a blog post. But anyway, just the only comment I have is, news of these things, and publicizing them is great because it does, I think, encourage other operators to try it as well. And sharing the fun we all have with SOTA and POTA and whatever else there is. I mean, that's what it's all about, right?
It certainly is. And when I was in the States 2019, I know Edmund and Ed both went off to do a SOTA activation. And I didn't think it was particularly high where we were. And the land looked quite flat or quite low to me. So I'd probably missed out. But I joked with them and said, well, you'd have to stand on top of a grain tower to be a SOTA summit. But hey, I was being naughty then. Yeah, great one. RSGB director Ben Lloyd, GW4BML. Congratulations, and I hope you enjoy yourself. Right, move to our next news story. Now, a 10-year-old. Think about it. A 10-year-old. Now, I've trained amateur radio people at the age of 10, but a 10-year-old YL in the Philippines is a net controller. Now, who says that young people are not interested in our hobby? They really are. Caryn, what's your thoughts?
Oh, I fell in love with this story the minute I heard that this little girl was taking the reins of a weekly evening net, checking people in. She is the daughter of two amateur radio operators, not surprisingly, who are active in a club, and that's the club whose net she has now been guiding. She is a very, very new licensee. She got her license, foundation license, over the summer, so she is really not just new to amateur radio studies and practice, but new to really being on the air and doing leadership. Now, she probably admittedly grew up around this, and I'm guessing sat in on some of these nets and has really heard her mom and dad talk about this. But it takes a sense of organization, a sense of poise. We've all heard good net control operators. We've all heard some who need a little work, who can't get the call signs, who lose the order of things. And she seems to be doing just fine. 10 years old. She sets an example, certainly, for kids everywhere. On a personal note, I like that she's a YL. Why not, right? Call her a why not a YL. And on top of that, when she's not on the air, she is, I think for 3 terms now, president of her class at school. So clearly she's got leadership abilities there as well. She excelled. How fabulous is that? So a story like this is an inspiration for all of us, and certainly for those net controllers who are many, many more times her age and can't quite get it together doing net control, maybe to think about stepping up their game a little bit and paying more attention to what needs to be done during a net. We can all learn from one another, and a lot of us have learned from people much younger than ourselves. Oh, she's one of them. Thanks, Martin. Back to you.
Yeah, it's you're dead right. If she's pushing the standard up, great. It's all too easy for people sometimes to achieve some level and then not get lazy and not operate to the way they should. If she's pushing the standard up by making people work, then that's good. There used to be a repeater in London, a GB3LW, and it was on top of what used to be London Weekend Television right in the centre of London. And that was frequented by taxi cabs. And I used to be a very naughty boy in my early days, and I'd go up on that repeater, and the taxi cab guys would hardly ever use their call signs. They weren't pirates, but they'd hardly ever use their call sign. And I'd start operating with my call sign and operating properly. And after about 3 overs, it's surprising. All the cabbies were operating properly. Sometimes it has to be done. But that's a silly little story. It was actually true. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, net control, being a net control is great practice. As Caryn noted, it develops poise and a sense of organization. And, I think it's an important skill to try and develop, because you never know when you're going to be called on to do that. So, this is a great example. It should encourage a lot of people to give it a try.
Yeah, and if you give it a try, it's one of the things I often say. It's a hobby, guys. If you get it wrong and you're improving, then there's nothing wrong with you having a go. You will improve, but unless you practice, you never improve. So you're dead right, Dan. People should have a go, because you never know when you might have to control something.
And I'm in total agreement with you about the fact that we're amateurs, So if you just jump in there, make some mistakes, who cares?
And learn. Nobody's going to die anyway, are they? So let's be honest about it. Let's improve things. Right, Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, apart from just saying, like everybody else had, it's nice to see youngsters in radio, and good on her for doing that. As long as she enjoys doing it, that's the main thing. And basically nothing more to say apart from that.
Yeah, as I say, you're dead right. That's good. Edmund, have we left you anything to say on this one?
Well, not really, other than that when I was 10 years old, I simply wouldn't have had the wherewithal to chair a net, even if I had a license. So I'm seriously impressed, and good on her.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice story. It puts youth in the spotlight for amateur radio, showing that we're not a dying hobby, and any good publicity for amateur radio has to be good. Right. hams are going to enjoy a SOTA eclipse. Now, this is one of many events, Ed, you were telling me about, but the SOTA boys are looking to do some activation when an solar eclipse is happening, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, somebody's played with the words in the heading here to make it sound SOTA related. And what it is, there are several QSO parties, excuses to get on the air, whatever, to coincide with the solar eclipse that's coming over parts of the US on October the 14th. And the whole idea is get as many radio stations as you can on the air, and the data gathered afterwards will hopefully tell the scientists something about what happens to radio waves during a solar eclipse. This particular group of people within the SOTA area have said, okay, we'll do some summit-to-summit contacts in the area where the total solar eclipse is going to go over. And so they've made it into a nice, camping weekend, a big weekend to enjoy amateur radio, and also to provide some data for the scientists, for the groups that are doing the solar eclipse research. And yeah, good on them. They've combined, again, it's a lot of the stories we're seeing is combining different things. This one's combining the solar eclipse research with summits on the air. You could have some POTA activators going out in some of the parks underneath the solar eclipse. I don't know, I haven't heard of that, but it would also make sense. The more stations that can get on for the solar eclipse, and they don't even have to be in the path, just to be on at the same time to give comparative data back through the various networks and websites, will help the scientists get a better picture of what's happening. In this particular case, the organisers also going to supply, going to do a bulk order on glasses. So if people want to look at the eclipse, they're not going to blind themselves. So yeah, it's a good effort, and hopefully it'll help with all the data. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I think collecting data and having fun, well, having fun and collecting data can't all be bad, can it? Yes, so it has to be fun. Caryn, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think, first of all, I want to say it wasn't completely clear to me that in this case they were going to be collecting data, only because I did ask him whether this event was part of the greater HAMSci program.
Yeah,
He indicated it.
Yeah, Caryn, sorry to interrupt you. They just need to be on the air. They don't actually collect the data themselves. They're providing, if you like, the signals in the air that the reverse beacon network,
Excellent.
PSK reporter, etc., etc. So,
Beautiful.
yeah, the HAMSci people will gather their data the same way as always, but the more people that are on the HF bands, on as many modes as possible, from as many places as possible, means the overall volume of data will be more.
Oh, that's perfect. Okay, yeah, because he said, in other words, they will be part of the overall picture. They just are going to be passively. Okay, thank you. Because he indicated it was really all about going out and camping, getting on the air, doing summit to summit contacts, and of course, just being with one another, which they tend to do anyway. This is a group that has been doing these kinds of campouts for a while, but they felt now, because there's going to be a solar eclipse, let's share the excitement. And as you said, Ed, he's going to provide glasses for anybody who wants to be up there with them, so that everybody can share it together. Well, I think it's natural for hams to want to share events, celestial events. I know I was out with my club about a couple of years ago. One brought along a telescope, and we were watching constellations, and we had a good time with that. So this falls right in line with that, because we do have a fascination with all of that space above us. I mean, courtesy of the space above us, we have radio. So what a nice way to combine all of that. And it's good to know ultimately it will indeed be useful. So can't wait to hear what the findings will be. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what's what. Now, Dan, you've just told me you don't do SOTA, but obviously this eclipse happening in the US might be a bit of fun to be on the air and see what you can work, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, for sure. They had this one of these solar eclipse QSO parties. I forget when, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and I operated, and I plan to operate this one as well because it's just a lot of fun, and it helps, as Ed said, generate data, and data is what it's all about with these studies. So I just encourage everybody that can to get on from wherever they can and generate some data for these folks.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing to stop us in other parts of the world getting on and being on the air, because the more people on the air, your signals go a hell of a long way. It's often there's just nobody at the other end that's listening. But if there's a lot of people on, you might very well surprise yourself.
Well, and not only that, the bands have been really good lately. I mean, so get on, just if only for that. But a week from Saturday on the October 14th, that's when they're going to be looking at the data.
Yeah, well, that'll be good. That'll be good then. Edmund, are you going to try and work some stations while this eclipse is happening?
Probably not, because on that particular day I'm helping a relative move house. But yes, the HF bands in general do seem to have picked up noticeably in the last couple of weeks, and this might be a good time for SOTA activations to try the lower frequency bands, especially if usually they tend to head towards the higher HF bands, because there could be some enhancement at those frequencies. You could sort of have a kind of much accelerated grey line effect, I guess, Martin.
Yeah, I was to say, it'll be interesting to see, and let's see what people do. Right, move to our next news story. There's a radio event in Serbia that honours Parks on the Air Activator, who's a pioneer and is now a silent key, unfortunately. Very interesting gentleman. Dan, would you like to go first on this one?
Sure. So this is a little bit like the story we covered 4 weeks ago about the POTA activation, I guess was in Alabama. Yeah, but so these using these events, using POTA activations or whatever. I guess it's not really a POTA. This is a worldwide flora and fauna, because this particular gentleman was more involved with that program. But using these kind of operating events to honor whoever, in this case, a well-known Serbian ham. I think it's just a great thing, a great thing to do. It gets people on the air, and we remember people that should be remembered.
Certainly does, and I think we're starting to see a pattern here. There's starting to be quite a few events and people out there doing things, which has got to be good for amateur radio. Caryn, I know you were extremely interested in this one, and you told us a lot more about Goran, this gentleman Goran, and what he'd actually done. So over to you.
Yes, thanks, Martin. Goran was a military test pilot. He was in the Serbian military, was a respected officer, and also a respected ham radio operator who was campaigning very hard to get an active worldwide flora and fauna program going in Serbia, and was a very big proponent. He loved the outdoors, and there are a couple of tributes to him on YouTube that I watched after I saw the story, and you could see they were made with great affection and great respect for him. Somewhere along the line after his death, and I couldn't determine exactly when, the WWFF community, or I should say the YUFF, the Serbian flora and fauna people, decided the best way to honor an outdoorsman and fellow operator would be to have a day of activation in the parks dedicated to him. And so there have been a number of them now. And I just feel, well, the tendency in amateur radio these days, from what I can observe, is that there's more and more and more emphasis on going outside, being outdoors, enjoying nature. The earth is so beautiful. Don't stay in your shack when there's so much to do. And there are portable batteries that can get you on the air, and there are antennas and small radios. So this is a good way to really not just spread the love of this kind of activation, but to respect the memory of a Silent Key who, in fact, according to the news reports, crashed his plane when he was doing a test flight into the plane was going down, and he steered it away from homes so that people in their homes would not be killed as a result of an accident that he knew was going to happen. So he also died a hero. So it is a very nice tribute that these folks are doing. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, that actually gives it far more meaning of honouring him, because when somebody gives their life to protect others, that's a big sacrifice, and he should be remembered. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Actually, Karen's covered everything I was going to come up and talk about, but yeah, so I've got nothing more to add, Martin.
Okie dokie, well, that's fair. I mean, we've all had a little look at this one, and I think it's rather an important one, that things are actually happening, which is quite good. Right, last news story. I'm going to let Caryn go first on this one, because I don't know. I think we might get into some interesting discussion. But the YL net is back. Oh, I didn't know it had gone away, but the YL net's back, Caryn. What do you think?
Yeah, I believe it took a summer hiatus, Martin, just because people's schedules are unpredictable in the summer. It's nice that there's a YL net, CW net for YLs on HF. And that sounds great, and I actually have participated as well myself, not in this net, but in a number of nets. Usually they are on Echolink, or no, I think that I've just been on the Echolink nets, but there are others on HF. They're everywhere. There are lots of YL nets. And I guess my question is this. Ham radio should be a very welcoming place, and I know that traditionally it's been perceived as a place that's difficult for YLs to exist in. I've never found it so, but again, I'm one person, so I can't speak for others. I've never ever found it unwelcoming because I'm a YL, and it's never been an issue. But are nets like this necessary? I think they're wonderful, but I wonder if an OM, if a guy wanted to check in, would he be welcome? And perhaps the idea of a gender-specific net has its place, but I wonder, this is a tough one. I wonder if in a way that might be a little exclusionary, because ham radio is supposed to be such a welcoming place. We certainly accept people of all ages and backgrounds and cultures. So a while only net, I think if it were welcoming, would be great. And who would know anyway, unless they checked QRZ, especially if you're doing CW, if you are a YL or not, and would that be perceived as something bad necessarily? I just don't know. I felt we should discuss this because it's a wonderful net. I'm glad it's back. I know the person who runs it. I have worked her. She's delightful and a good op, really good op. But do we need YL only nets? Do we need OM only nets? Is this a convention whose time perhaps has passed? So I just wanted to throw that open for discussion. I'm going to stand back and cover my head. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, I'm not operating as Martina, So you're all right, guys. And yes, I kind of hear where you're coming from. I mean, I treat everybody as I find them. And I think, you know, I wonder if by segregating people, that's going to exclude them as much as anything else. Now, I know from our point of view in the UK and your point of view in the States, we're now more, let's just treat people as people. But other parts of the world, this might not be the case. You know, other parts of the world, they've still got their customs, and ladies are often not supposed to talk to strange men. And I know I'm pretty strange, so there you go. But Ed, what's your thoughts?
Not a lot. CWNet, I won't be joining anyway. And yes, if a group wants to set themselves up as being only a particular interest, or in this case, a particular sex, that's up to that group. The problems come is if they then say, okay, then we exclude other people. And that's not in the spirit of amateur radio, and I think that's probably all I can say on that. But as you touched on, Martin, certain areas of the world, a YL-only net might be a safe place for ladies. You know, different cultures, different meanings. I don't think we can give a generic answer to this one. I think the point most of us would make would be we don't want a net that excludes people. But if it's a specialist net in some way, you know, to talk about, I don't know, RTTY or whatever, or fast cars or whatever, the people in that group, as long as they don't exclude other people from coming in and trying to join, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going slightly off of the tangent, and I'll bring the rest of the presenters in a minute, but going slightly off of the tangent, I mean, here at the ICQ podcast, it took us a long time to find ladies that were able, and I say able, to speak their mind openly. I've met quite a few lady amateurs, YLs, ex-YLs as well, that the husband stands behind them as almost working them like a puppet. I didn't want this. I felt that was not the right thing to do. I'm lucky that Caryn and Ruth, when she can make it, speak their mind. And that, to me, is far more important. You know, I don't treat Caryn any different to the rest of the team, and she don't treat me any different, which is nice. And we don't always agree. But I do appreciate a different point of view at times, and I think that's a good one. So, Caryn, I'm going to go back to you again very quickly. Was that a fair statement?
Yeah, you've mentioned that before. I think when you first brought me on board, Martin, you had told me that, which I find, gosh, I found that unusual. I don't doubt that it was true, but I find it unusual because I know in my circle and even, you know, I'm not a millennial. I'm not even a Gen Xer. I'm of another generation. And it doesn't seem particular to my generation, but then I can't speak for everybody, but I believe you. I believe that perhaps in some households, what happens is the YL will get the ticket after the husband, simply because either it's expected or it's a nice husband-wife thing to do. So yes, I do think your statement is certainly fair and accurate.
I've also seen Caryn where a YL or an ex-YL has got their license after the OM and then gone on and got a higher grade license, and the OM has the rights drop and gives up amateur radio. But that's another story. It shouldn't be. Edmund, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, shortly after I got licensed in 2009, I had conversations with amateurs of many decades standing, and there were 2 or 3 of them who were proficient in CW and active using CW as well as voice modes. And independently of each of these three, I had conversations about CW and whether it was mainly men that did it, because if you listen to SSB, the vast majority of voices you hear will be male. And all three of these long-standing amateurs said that in their experience, it was far more common to find ladies using CW rather than voice modes, which then prompted the question, well, is it because they tend to be mic shy? To which the answer was no, because any person can be shy when they're sitting behind a microphone. But because the vast majority of radio amateurs are male, in the experience of these three experienced people, CW tended to be preferred by some ladies because it offered a certain amount of anonymity. Okay, I know you can go straight onto qrz.com or get the yearbook out even then, but the impression I got was that some ladies preferred it because it meant that they were just a key sending a signal rather than a voice being modulated onto the airwaves. So if there are enough ladies out there who want to form a net, I'm perfectly, in support of them doing so. And in terms of inclusion or exclusion, yes, you don't want to exclude anybody, but you could turn it round the other way and say by including everybody, irrespective of their gender, then you are, by dint of that, excluding some people who would feel more comfortable with just ladies rather than a mixture. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, fine business, Edmund. And we always knew this was going to be a difficult subject because there's so many angles you can come at this, but it is worrying. Dan, you do a hell of a lot of Morse. It's your favourite mode, I know. What's your thoughts on this YLCW net?
Well, I tell you, if there's nets for everything, right? And if it's a special interest and they don't want men to join, well, that's fine with me. I might try and join it actually myself. I put it on my calendar just now. Might join it just now to see if see what my reception would be. But I'm fine with it either way, right? If we had a teletype net, talking about teletype, well, you wouldn't want to, get on there and start talking about FT8 or whatever, So anyway, that's that. And again, I might try and sign in one of these days just to see how it goes, and I'll report back when I do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, guys, I think what I get from this is we need, none of us have a clear, definite, this is a good thing or a bad thing. I think inclusion or exclusion, they need to consider it very difficult, seriously. I just think personally that whatever's happening, we should have fun. And if somebody makes the effort to join a group, providing they're not being a complete idiot when they've got into the group, and that's the other thing, they behave themselves when they got into a group, then I'm all for including everybody and everybody getting on together. But that's just my thoughts on that one. Well, that was our last news story. Let's find out what the team have been up to since the last time I spoke to them. And being a total sexist, Caryn, ladies first.
You do realize, Martin, that by choosing me, you are excluding the men.
I am.
I just want to point that this is yes.
You'll get me into trouble.
Well, I've had an interesting time of it. I had a POTA activation over the weekend, which was what I call a just add water and mix, basically a very quick CW activation from a park because I was just needing to get out there, and a half hour seemed to be plenty. And it was boom, 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 boom. Every minute I was getting another contact. It was actually quite exhilarating, but it's nice to be able to do that, although I want to do more conventional POTA. That said, I had a major fail a few days earlier, which was going out to the famous Jones Beach here in New York and hoping to do my first beachfront activation on the Atlantic. That was a serious issue with the antenna, which Ed and I talked about and have sorted out a little bit about what could have gone wrong, and it may not actually end up being the antenna itself. So we're trying to forget that one and concentrate on the one on Sunday. And both, and I guess, Ed, I'll let you talk a little bit more if you wish about the Faraday cloth. But my latest experiment, again with Ed's guidance, is to attempt now to do not a substitute for what I call a conventional antenna setup, but an alternative antenna setup. I want to experiment with a Faraday cloth and a vertical, to use the Faraday cloth as ground plane. And basically it's like a 2-second setup. In theory, it should work with a resonant ham stick on whatever band I want. So it's a learning curve for me, which is, hey, that's what ham radio is all about. So I continue with that experiment. Beyond that, I'm looking forward to an event at the end of the month, the Zombie Shuffle, which is a CW, and it's going to be slow speed because zombies do not move quickly. And this is in honor of Halloween, of course, my second favorite holiday. And the Zombie Shuffle I participated in last year was fantastic. If any CW ops are listening, even if you're super QRS, you can get involved in this, and I encourage it. It's an awful lot of fun. I will be doing it again this year, and I will also be doing, because I love special events, I will be doing a one of the ops for the Headless Horseman special event having to do with the legend of Sleepy Hollow, also at the end of the month. So there's, Jesus, you can never be bored with amateur radio. I will attempt to find some time to sleep because there's a lot on the calendar. But again, all of it's good. And when the time comes, hopefully I can report back to everyone how everything went. Okay, that's all I've got. Thanks, Martin. Back to you.
Well, you've got a lot on the go, Caryn, which is good. And I can tell from your voice you're enjoying it, which is the most important thing. So that's a good one. Edmund, what are you up to these days?
Well, on the last Saturday of September, there was another edition of the 145 Live event, organised or coordinated by Tim, Golf 5 Tango Mike, which aims to have more simplex activity on 2 meters FM. Now, this time I didn't take part because I was actually marshalling or helping to marshal a sponsored walk across the South Downs at the time, and I was posted in an absolute dead spot for VHF. I was standing at the side of the road where there were very tall and steep hills lined with trees pretty much all around me. So no chance of getting a 2 meter signal out with a handheld. But the event, I gather, was very successful, not least because for the first time this time round, there were stations taking part in Gulf India and Echo India, so Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Tim is still crunching the numbers, as I understand it, but if you keep an eye on his YouTube channel or on Twitter /X/ whatever it's called this month, I'm sure there'll be updates from Tim about how the event went overall. coming up in the future, on the third weekend in October, it's YOTA Jamboree on the Air. I'll be taking part in that locally. And the two big things which always go down really well at these events are CW and PMR 446. CW because even though it's, shall we say, slightly older technology than the latest mobile phones that many of the young scouts are used to, it does have a certain mystique about it. And I think it's the thing about knowing something that not everybody else knows. So even if you've just got a Morse key and a loudspeaker, if you send even just your first name in CW, the fact that you know what it is, but other people within earshot who will hear the noise but won't know what letters of the alphabet that represents, just that sort of thing about having won over other people, that you know something they don't, that seems to hold a sort of mystique and interest for the scouts, as I found in previous years. And PMR 446 is great. Get half a dozen of those and hand them out to scouts and get them to, talk to each other or shout at each other over the airwaves and try to explain about the capture effect of FM, which they will completely ignore and just transmit over top of each other anyway. But it's organised chaos and good fun. Back to VHF, around about now there should have been some slow scan TV coming down from the International Space Station, but due to technical problems that has now been postponed, and they're going to do it between the 16th and the 20th of October instead, all being well. So during those dates, if the space station goes over, tune your radio to 145.800, preferably with wide deviation, so you won't have to adjust for Doppler shift too much, and see if you can receive some noise, some SSTV signals, and if you play those through a myriad of freeware out there, your computer, your phone, whatever it is, with a bit of luck, we'll be able to convert those noises into pictures, and hopefully we will have some different images this time rather than the ones of Russian cosmonauts, which seem to have been transmitted rather a lot over the last few years. And last but not least, bunkers on the air. This came out of nowhere. I hadn't heard anything about this until about the middle of September. And there is a website, bunkersontheair.org, and several people in the UK have organised this really, really quickly. The idea is that the whole of October is Bunkers on the Air month, so the organisers are encouraging people to activate bunkers that used to belong to the ROC, the Royal Observer Corps, of which there are many, many hundreds all around the UK. Not all of them exist anymore. Some of them have been destroyed or filled in, but there's 1,000-metre activation zone circumference around each one, and if you make 25 QSOs, it's deemed to be a valid activation, although you don't have to do 25 all in one go. And to get into the spirit of it, I activated my local one. I thought it was going to be a one-off, but I made 92 contacts on 40 metres SSB in about 4 hours, which is a lot by my standards, given that I'm a rag chewer, basically. And buoyed by that experience and the big pile up, I'm going to try and do a few more in a very casual manner throughout the rest of October. So if you're anywhere near the UK, particularly if you listen on 40 metres SSB, you will probably hear Bunkers on the Air quite a lot. maybe a few special event call signs, but for the most part, I think it's just going to be people using their ordinary call signs and putting /portable on the end. So that's it, Martin. Back to you.
Yeah. Sounds like you've been busy, and shame you didn't make it to the not so secret nuclear bunker, or it is called the secret nuclear bunker, but everybody knows where it is now, in Essex, when we went a couple of weeks ago, Edmund. But hey hum, you're certainly doing well there. Right, Dan, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, doing POTA, and more POTA. I had two distinctly different POTA experiences, one the day after the other. So on Monday, a couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine, Tom, WATAM, took me on a POTA rove. And he has this vehicle, we call it the POTA-mobile, and it's all set up to do portable operation. So he says, what he did was he got to my house at 8:30. We left my house at 8:30. And in the next 6 hours, we actually went to 10 different parks. Although one stop counted for 4. So we actually made 7 stops. But we went to 10 different parks, and I made at least 10 contacts from each. And so I got the Rhino Rover Award for activating 10 parks in one day. and this, here's another thing that apparently is in the rules. And Tom is like Mr. POTA, right? I mean, he's the guy in charge of doing the POTA app development. So he knows the rules. He sets the rules. He brought along 2 VX7R HTs. And just like in County Hunters, if you make even a VHF or UHF contact with 2 people inside a county, that counts, right? Well, the same thing in POTA. So at each stop, we made 4 different contacts because those VX7Rs were set up to operate 4 different bands. We made, one on 6 meters, one on 2 meters, one on 220, which is a band here in the US, and then on 440. So at every stop, we made those 4 contacts. So I even forget how many contacts I had at the end of the day. I probably could look it up, but that was just wild. We'd roll up, we'd roll into the parking lot, we'd turn on the radio, I'd make 10 contacts, we're on to the next park. The very next day, I had this was all in Morse code, except for the VHF, UHF contacts. The very next day, I had a totally different experience. So I go out with my friend Paul, KW1L, and I now have a Jigu X6100, and we took it out to this park we go to a lot, K3315 actually. And he said, we got out there and they set up the antenna, and Paul says, why don't we do phone today? Well, I'm not a big phone operator, but Paul says, let's do it. So I said, oh, sure, well, let's try it. So we set up the Jigu to do phone, 10 watts on sideband, and we made contacts. We actually did pretty well. We over the course of about an hour, we made 14 contacts, all on phone, and we called it a day. We made our 10 contacts of legal activation. But one of the more amusing contacts we made was with a fellow who called us. We gave the exchange, and because we're on phone and we'd already made our 10 contacts, we kind of just did a little exchange pleasantries, let's say, and then I started calling CQ again. Well, a couple of minutes later, he calls me back, and he says, Dan, I recognize your voice. You're on the ICQ podcast, aren't you? I said, yeah, that's me. And we had a nice little chat about the ICQ podcast. So you got some fervent listeners here in the U.S. So those are one day after the other. One day was 10 parks, all CW except for the VHF contacts. And next day was 14 contacts, all QRP on phone. So you couldn't have had 2 different POTA experiences. And then finally, I taught another one-day tech class last Saturday, and I got 15 out of 17 to pass. And I'm thinking of not counting one of those failures because the guy just sort of dropped into the class out of the blue without any kind of preparation, and as you might expect, he failed the test. So maybe I'll count only one real failure, but that's what I've been up to.
Yeah, it sounds great, Dan. And I thought I read on your blog you also did another POTA activation where you left the mast behind. Was that true, or you couldn't get your antenna that high?
Well, right. So that was a different one. I forgot to bring along the mast, and so what we ended up doing was, so we operate from a pavilion. There's a picnic shelter there, and the roof on that, the fascia on the roof is up, probably not quite 10 feet, and there happened to be a nail sticking out of the fascia there, and we were able to stand on one of the tables and get the center insulator onto that nail. So the center of the doublet antenna was up less than 10 feet. But even so, we made contacts, and that was an interesting experience too.
Yeah, the thing is, never give up. You never know. So
and the bands, like Edmund's been saying, the bands have been really good. Really good. I went out today a couple of times already, or this week a couple of times already, and on Monday I made 50 contacts with 5 DX contacts, and yesterday I made 43 contacts with 4 DX contacts, and those DX contacts yesterday were on 10 meters. So the bands get on the bands, man. They're hot.
Yeah, certainly sounds it, Dan. And you sound really, I mean, I can hear in your voice you got a smile from ear to ear of doing that sort of thing.
It's so much fun. And, we don't have summits here in Southeast Michigan, but we've got great parks. I mean, really great parks. And, if you look at my blog, you've seen some of the pictures. And the weather here has been really nice this summer. And, the whole thing is, the bands have been good, the weather's been good, the parks are nice, so it's all just made a wonderful experience.
Yeah, spot on. So, Ed, has Dan out and gazumped you with his parks, or have you been busy?
Well, I wasn't going to mention it, but I did work VKNZL this morning before breakfast, seriously, from a summit. So the bands are fantastic at the moment, and that was 20 watts a sideband on 20 meters. And get out and just echoing, whether it's a park, a summit, a bunker, a castle, a barge in a river, whatever the award scheme is, portable award schemes. Get out and do them while you can before the winter arrives, or in the case of SOTA, keep on going all the way through winter. A lot of us down here do. Okay, I wonder if some of the listeners remember the Dr. Hook song, Picture on the Cover of the Rolling Stone. Well, in our small community, I think I've beaten that, as my name is featured on both the front of the new RSGB handbook, which itself is featured on the cover of the Radcom magazine. I haven't wanted to say anything publicly about it, but for the last 9 months, I have been the managing editor for the latest version of the RSGB Handbook, edition 15. And it was a lot of work, but I'm happy with the result. And it was actually a real pleasure to work with all the individual authors and indeed the DTP professionals as well. And so I'm on a bit of a high from that all has happened, and the new RSGB handbook is now released and up for ordering and everything else. So I'm looking forward to getting my own personal copy of that at some point. Okay, now back down to earth. I've at last finished tuning my 20-meter 2-element wire beam, and I hope to get that in use on a portable site after I come back from the RSGB convention. I've also been helping test Rob DM1CM's new antenna modeling website, and this might interest you, Martin, and some of the listeners as well. The website's called SOTA-antennas.com, so SOTA-antennas.com. And it's for anybody like me who could never get their head around the modeling software on a local PC, the antenna modeling software, EasyNEC and NEC2 and so on. This website's actually designed to be very simple to use, and it's definitely worth a try for people who have thought, I'll never get into antenna modeling. It's easy to use and fun to use, and Rob will be happy of any comments back to him as well, where he can expand it and all the rest of it. So, amateur radio developing as always. And nowadays it incorporates a lot of software development. Rob's quite good at that. Yeah, I'd like to, actually, I just want to say as well, in response to the comment from Edmund about the bunkers on the air, I've actually already put that in my list of things to do when I come over to the UK next week. And I've already found one close to where I'll be staying. So I'll be trying some BOTA, bunkers on the air in this case, not beaches on the air, HEMA, SOTA, World Castle Awards, and POTA activations. I probably won't get them all fitted in, but I'll be getting some of those anyway. I hope to meet a few of the listeners at the RSGB convention, and I'll finish up with a couple of shout-outs. And the first one is to April, M7APR, who helped in fixing a POTA problem for me very quickly, and I appreciate that. And the other second shout-out goes to David Patrick, G6EGM, who is a ICQ podcast listener, and indeed also a HF Pro 2 antenna fan like myself. So good, as I say, let's hope we... Martin, I know you're there as well. I don't know how many others of the crew will be at the convention, but it'll be good to meet some of the listeners. If you see us around with the orange shirts, come along, don't be shy. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, no problems at all. Well, sounds like you've been having a lot of fun. And RSGB convention, it is on my list to talk about, but I'll bring it to the top because you've mentioned it. We're only there. We have a room on the Saturday. So I'm only going to be there on the Saturday. If you go on the Friday or the Sunday, I won't be able to talk to you. But we have a room. We're running 2 sessions. They're presentation plus discussion. And hopefully we'll be able to do something with them. It's suggestions for amateur radio. So we're there. And I believe Chris Howard, Martin Rothwell, Colin and myself will be there. I have tried to get Mrs. B to go, but it's unlikely at the moment. So on that one. On your book, Ed, yes, I've ordered it. It's coming as a Christmas present, but I don't think it's in stock at the moment. So I ordered
it's physically coming off the printing presses as we speak.
All right. Yeah, that's what I thought it probably was, because I ordered one. I ordered one, and Carol said, I'll give it to you as part of your Christmas present. So I've now got to wait till December 25th to have a look at it, but it'll be here. So I've got one on order. What else I've been up to? Well, I've had a little bit of a problem with batteries, and I had a car battery in a box, and it's been perfectly okay up until the last time I went to use it, and it had drained for some reason, and I don't know why it drained right down. So I went to charge it with my battery charger, and my battery charger says, it's fully charged. What it actually meant was it's taking no current. An investigation, I put it on charge for quite a while to see if it would reactivate, and unfortunately not. When I take the battery charger off, it promptly drops fairly quickly from whatever it thinks it had in it to about 10 volts, which probably means one of the cells in the car batteries had it. Can't do anything about that, so I have to get a new car battery. Also, my little sealed lead acid charger, the one I bought many moons ago, didn't pay hardly anything for it, so I can't complain too much, but it was for charging golf carts. That seemed to stop working, and my sealed lead acid batteries weren't charging in the other battery box. So I resurrected which has been at the back of this shed for a good number of years. Not the best environment in the world, but I resurrected my old sealed lead acid charger, which actually works. So at least I can do me sealed lead acids. Now, Edmund mentioned 145 Alive. A couple of the boys from the club went out to do 145 Alive, and I said I'd just pop along, and I didn't want to take over on one thing or another. One of the gentlemen is a foundation license holder, and a very good one, and he just hasn't progressed because he's busy, and his friend's an intermediate license holder. And I met up with them. They could only operate for about 2 to 3 hours, and I met up with them on Epsom Downs, which is quite a high point in the south of England. And we're up there, and they were going to try and operate from a mag mount on top of the car. And I said, how do you fancy playing a bit more? Because I know it's FM, but I've got one of these military masts, and if we don't put it all the way up, we put it up to about 3.5 meters. You can reach up and you can twist a bit at the top. And I've got a 4-element Yagi. If we mount it vertically instead of horizontally, that'll be perfectly all right. And I put this Yagi on a pole about 3.5 meters up, just above head height, and we were pulling stations in all over the place. Now, I think it's possibly because there were lots of people on and lots of people listening, but the two guys, when I saw them on Monday night, still had a smile from ear to ear from the Saturdays operating. They said, God, that was fantastic. So we had some fun, and I quite enjoyed being out, and it was a good one. So like that. Have operated a reasonable amount on 2.77 meters from the car, and whenever possible, I'm on the talk group, which doesn't seem to be as often as normal, but unfortunately, I do try and do that. Edmund mentioned YOTA in about 2 weeks' time. Yeah, I'm out doing YOTA with a scout group in Sussex. I've been asked to go and do it down at Forest Row. There's supposed to be a big scout centre there, and I've been asked to help out. So I should be doing YOTA. And last but not least, is Colin, Chris, and I have booked our flights to come over to the States for Dayton next year. So we've actually committed. The flights are booked, and that's looking good. Last but not least, this is a pure advert for the GQRP Club. And in fairness, I can't give you the article, but I can give you the essence of an article that was printed in this month's Sprat magazine. Sprat magazine comes out once a quarter. Nice little colour A5 book. And it was talking about using a computer with an IC 7300. And what the guy was saying is that RF comes back down sometimes. It gets back into your shack or picked up on the USB leads. And he was saying if you get a large ferrite and you wind it like you would a choke ballon for an antenna, that kills off all the RF on the USB cable. So just a little thing worth passing on. It's, the standard 14 turns or 7, and then you come back through and another 7 turns. Wiring it like that as a choke ballon could stop you having problems in the shack. I know I have problems with my USB cables, so I'm waiting for my ferrites to arrive. When I ordered them on Amazon, I didn't realise they were coming from the States. So even though I booked it from a UK site, so they should be here this weekend, and I'll have a go at it this weekend, building my balance up. So there you go. That's what I've been up to. Hopefully the last bit about the 7300, if anybody's got one, might find that useful. Right, all that's left for me to do now is thank the guys for joining me tonight, and move on to the rest of the podcast. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
Well, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, good to have you, Dan. I'd also like to thank Caryn Eve Murray KD2GUT.
Thank you, Martin. Another great discussion. Take care.
Yeah, and the last one, we did get very close, didn't we?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0MG.
Thanks for having me on, Martin.
No problems, mate. And last but not least, Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP.
Yep, thanks, Martin. And to everybody, remember, stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy the hobby.
Spot on. Right, 73, guys.
73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert-free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. We start with unfortunate news that the Cambridge Amateur Radio Club VE3 Sierra Whiskey Alpha's repeater VE3 Sierra Whiskey Romeo went offline early this month regarding a break-in where the club stores its equipment. Now, while the repeater is offline, kudos needs to be given to the Kitchener-Waterloo Amateur Radio Club, who have helped out the Cambridge guys by providing hardware and access to their equipment while they're waiting for this to be sort of sorted out and, insurance and monetary raised, etc. So Scott Mitchell, who's the president of the Cambridge Club VA3 Golf Tango, said that the club's electric generator went missing along with numerous tools after the break-in, and they'll be doing their best to try and resolve things as fast as they could. In terms of the amateur radio stuff, the storage shed where it was stored in was set on fire, and the repeaters suffered smoke damage, and the club's duplex has been thrown to the other side of the shed and was destroyed. So a lot of work to be done there by the guys to get that unit back on the air. But I'm sure the help from their local clubs and members, etc., will help them as soon as possible. So good luck with getting that repeater back up on the air. We have an update on the HEMA award scheme, and it's slowly expanding with Cyprus, East Malaysia and West Malaysia being added to, and the first activations occurring from those regions in the last few months. And this is following on from the first World HEMA Day that took place at the beginning of September. It was a good response, and from that day, now all the certificates have been sent out to all those who, achieved the criteria required. A special mentions goes to Bill, Mike 0, Delta X-Ray Tango, and David, Mike 0, Yankee Delta Hotel, as the joint top scorers. So well done there, guys. There's also, if you're interested in this scheme, there is a smartphone app for Android smartphones called the HEMA Assistant that is in the testing phase, and they should be available in your app store as required. If you want to find out more about this event, you can go to HEMA, that's Hotel Echo Mike Alpha.org.uk. Right, well, now we head over to our feature this episode, which is our feature on simple test gear that you can build. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Well, hi guys. For this episode's feature, I wanted to talk about simple test gear you can build. Now, I know it's not fully amateur radio as such, but it is interesting, at least to me. As we move into the winter here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're going to be doing more indoor stuff because it'll be cold, wet and miserable outside. Doesn't mean you say you can't operate, but doing things in these long dark evenings might just be a bit of fun in the shack/workshop to have a go at some of these little projects that I feel have been very, very useful. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do them. I'm just going to suggest where you can find them. I'm also going to say right at this moment in time, you have to make your own decision. Are you safe to do this? I don't want you to be killed by doing something outside of your skill set or your comfort level. We never want to lose any of our listeners. So the first thing you've got to do is definitely make sure that you feel safe before you start working on anything that is high voltage. Now, power supplies. You can never have enough of these. Come on, boys, you know that as well as I do. But there's various power supplies that can be useful for experimenting. Now, there are a number of computers now being written off, and there's lots of ideas up on YouTube on how to convert a ATX power supply, giving you plus and minus 12 volts, giving you 15 volts, all sorts of voltages. And that would be quite a useful little power supply for actually using in a workshop. Now, in fairness, you've probably heard me say this before, if ATX power supplies stop working, it's usually the electrolytics in them that develop ESR, effective serial resistance, and replacing them will often fix them. Now, once again, you have to understand the component specification, because you need high temperature capacitors, capacitors that work at high temperatures, because it is a sealed box. But this could be a very, very cheap way of making a multi-voltage power supply. Now, there's nothing to stop you experimenting if you want a variable power supply. There's nothing to stop you experimenting. There's various circuits on the internet. If you're not safe with sticking your hand in something that's mains, then why not use an old laptop charger? And these things run at about 19 volts output. So on the output side, which would have plugged into the laptop, they're about 19 volts. So there are various circuits around. You can make all sorts of things by putting series regulators on them or variable regulators on them. You could make variable power supplies. So you're not limited by the fact that your mains is your worry, because there are other ways of doing it. Now, that's just power supplies, and you probably think I'm being silly on this one, but they can be very, very useful. And as I say, I've never, ever complained about having too many power supplies. Next one, I built one of these not so long ago, was a RF/AF signal tracing probe. Now, they're very useful, and you've heard me talk about these before. They're only about 3 components, a resistor, a capacitor, and a diode. However, they are very, very useful. If you don't have an oscilloscope and you want to track a signal through a device, then these can be very useful because you can hear where the signal disappears. Once again, they're very, very cheap devices. Now, if you can either plug them into a set of computer speakers, which I've done in the past quite happily, or you can make yourself a little audio amplifier based on an LM386. Now, even if you don't fancy building the audio amplifier board, and trust me, you can't build them for the price of the components that you can buy one actually made. There are lots of these little LM386 boards online. You put voltage on them, you put your input signal, and then the output signal goes to a speaker. So you can build a very, very simple audio amplifier with one of these little boxes. Now, either you use it in conjunction with your signal tracing circuit, or you can use it as an extra audio amplifier. Is there audio here? I'll stick this in an amplifier headphone socket or whatever. Could be very useful. Now, one of the other things I've done, as electronics get smaller and smaller, often it's very difficult to get your probes into places where you need them to go. And one of the things I've done very recently with my multimeters within the last year is I've got a couple of sewing needles. And what I did was I soldered a red and black wire onto the sewing needle. I covered it with heat shrink sleeving and melted it down, and plugs on the end to fit the multimeter. Now, be careful in your box because they will job in your hand if you go rummaging. But as long as you keep them safe, when you get them out, obviously it's important for two reasons to have the ends covered with, say, heat shrink or another device, because you don't want to be touching the probes, because either you'll get a shock, should you work on high voltage, and most of the stuff is low voltage for this sort of thing, but you could get a shock, or you're going to affect the reading by putting your own capacitance across the circuit, so or capacitance and resistance. So useful. And not only that, there are lots of little leads you can make up. You think, all right, I want to do this. There's lots of little leads that are maybe worth thinking about making at this point in time, and probes and things like that. What about a signal source? Well, if we're working on something, an audio amplifier or whatever, the old-fashioned 555 timer, okay, you can get it to run at a sensible frequency, and I'd suggest somewhere around about 1 kilohertz, and it gives you a nice little sine wave, nice little square wave coming out of it. Now, there's various circuits on the internet for this, but if you put a filter network after it, and you fit various resistors and capacitors in the output circuit on the filter thing, you can also get this little 555 timer to produce a square wave, and then going through the filter you can output a sine wave, a triangular wave, as well as a square wave. So quite useful. It's just a simple little signal source, won't cost you much money to build, bit of fun. Now, when I first came into the hobby, you had to have a meter to work out whether you were causing interference by harmonics. And this little meter was set up so you tune to the frequency and you tune to a harmonic and you'd see if it was there. Now, one thing or another, they're quite useful to build, and for a bit of fun, they don't cost much. If you've got an old meter you picked up at a rally and you don't know what to do with, might be useful for it. Or if you haven't got a meter, there's circuits on the internet that show how you can connect these things to a multimeter and use your meter output on the multimeter. That way, as you tune to the various frequencies, you can see if there's a harmonic there. Wave absorption meter is the one I'm thinking of. The other one is, you could actually just make it so that it showed that you are producing RF. So for argument's sake, I made one some many years ago, that just when I key up, the meter movement moves. So I know that I'm radiating some RF. Doesn't tell me much more than that, but it's a nice little feeling that I know the transmitter is transmitting. So quite useful. Dummy loads? Well, we always need dummy loads, and for RF, dummy loads, be careful. There are various resistor packs you can use these days, or you can use the standard carbon resistors. Now, when you make one of these, and even on the commercially built ones, check the frequency response of it. You know, it might work very well at HF, and I've got ones that are 1-to-1 at HF and about 3-to-1 at UHF. So, you know, be aware. The dummy loads are interesting to make. They're very simple. You can make them in a little while. And if you've got a little, well, it used to show a paint tin, but a tin of some description, if you put the resistors into oil, and there's lots of discussions on the internet about this, but you put the resistors into oil, it dissipates the heat off the resistors quickly, which means that your dummy load can work at much, much higher wattage than you would expect the resistors to actually handle. Now, we always talk about dummy loads for RF, but what about dummy loads for other things? Well, if you're doing a lot of audio amplifier work, then a wire-bound resistor is perfectly okay as a dummy load. You know, it's substituting a loudspeaker for argument's sake. If you're testing power supplies, wire-bound resistors as dummy loads across power supplies, perfectly acceptable. And this is where I'm going to go safety again. I have made a device where I have a light bulb in series with the mains to feed the device. It's a current limiter. If I switch on something and it's short circuit, the bulb glows really, really bright. If it's working normally, the bulb might just about light up. Now, that's quite a useful one. And then I have a switch across the bulb so that when I'm sure that there's not a short circuit, I can then switch the bulb out of circuit by shorting it out and give the device full voltage. Now, that's quite useful because if it's something you've never switched on or it's been not used for a long time, it might have gone faulty. Why do you want to end up blowing fuses, cost to you, and safety? And if you've reduced the current going into the thing, if there is a short circuit, things are not likely to burn up. So just a couple of little silly little things that hopefully might have helped you. As I say, after 400 episodes, I might be struggling a bit for features, but I think these are quite useful things to do in the winter months in the Northern Hemisphere. But that doesn't exclude you guys down in the Southern Hemisphere. They may be very useful or something you stick in the back of your mind to do when your winter comes round. I hope this helps.
The ICQ Podcast. Getting it said for amateur radio.
Well, thank you always for listening to the ICQ Podcast, episode 414. As always, we hope you got something from the show, and certainly our feature, simple test gear that you can build for anybody that likes a workshop project or tinkering, etc. I'm sure there'll be something wonderful there for you to get your teeth into, as I say, over the coming weeks and months. Now, next weekend, the weekend of the 14th and 15th, actually on the 14th itself, we'll be at RSGB convention. We'll be running a couple of lectures there, and certainly some interesting topics and debates, etc. So if you're going to be at the event, feel free to come along, show your support, etc. We would love to have you there, and it'd be great to see you at those events. If you can't make it, obviously we'll record the details, and we'll be using those in future shows, as I say, so you'll be able to hear what we'll be doing at those events. And as I say, as always, it'd be great to see your support at those shows. Now, we'd like to thank Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Caryn, KD2 Golf Uniform Tango, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, and Ed, DD5 Lima Papa, for taking part in the News Roundtable. As always, we'd like to thank our monthly and subscription donors, as they wonderfully helped us pay our way and keep your show advert free. As always, if you've got any benefit from what we've done in today's show, please visit icqpodcast.com/donate, as I say, to send that value that you found to us and help us continue to do the work that we enjoy doing, as I say, for you from there. Right, well, that just about wraps up this episode 414 of the ICQ Podcast. As I say, if you're at RSGB convention next week, look forward to seeing you. And if not, we'll catch up again in a fortnight's time. 73 though.